So the Errol Spence fans and the PBC cult members are making excuses following Spence's defeat to Terence Crawford. They're saying that it was the weight that affected Errol Spence. He's been very tight at 147 for a long time, and he came into the ring drained, and that's why he looked nervous and all that type of stuff. And they're also saying that he hasn't been the same since the car accident, so on and so forth. Well, you weren't saying any of this after Errol Spence destroyed you guys. You weren't talking about, oh, he's not the same since the crash and he's drained and all that. You weren't saying none of that. So don't try to come to me with all those excuses now that he got destroyed by Terence Crawford. Now, to get the obvious out of the way, Errol Spence's car accident was very serious. He suffered a number of injuries, and initially, it looked like he might never box again. That was apparently the prognosis. He had eye surgery as well. He is not going to be better physically after all that than he was prior. That should go without saying. He's going to be worse to some extent, but we saw against Danny Garcia and against Ugas that he was still very, very good. So how much deterioration there was since the crash is unclear, but it's not an extreme amount. If it was, he'd never have beaten Ugas and he'd never have dominated him in the way that he did. That was a dominant performance. And based on that performance, you Spence fans and PBC cult members were picking him to beat Crawford. And there's nothing wrong with picking Errol Spence over Crawford. I didn't know who was going to win. It's just the fact that now you're trying to come out with excuses that you weren't mentioning before. I mean, you go back and look at Errol Spence when he fought Sean Porter. That wasn't a great performance. And that was pre-crash, right? Don't get it twisted. Sean Porter's a handful for anyone. But it's not like Errol Spence went in there and dominated and beat the brakes off Porter at all. So again, my point is, Spence has always had holes in his game, as most fighters do. We can't start blaming all the holes in his game that have always existed on weight and the car accident. If there's one thing that I'm willing to maybe concede about Errol Spence since the crash, is that his punch resistance might not quite be the same. And it's not just based on the Terence Crawford fight, it's also based on the Ugas fight. Earlier on in Errol Spence's career, when he fought Porter, when he fought Kell Brook back in the days, he took some heavy shots and his legs never reacted the way that they did when he fought Terence Crawford. So that's a point I might have to concede, that his punch resistance is maybe not what it used to be. But in order for someone to test your punch resistance, you have to be getting hit in the first place. Against Ugas, apart from once or twice in the fight, he really didn't get hit. Ugas wasn't good enough, and Ugas is a good fighter, but he wasn't good enough to be able to really penetrate Errol Spence's defense. Terence Crawford was good enough. And my point is, Terence Crawford would have always been good enough, pre-crash or post-crash, to get through Errol Spence's defense and land consistently. He's the more skilled fighter, always was. The question in my head going into the fight was, could he deal with the size and strength of Errol Spence? Because there comes a point, no matter how skilled a fighter is, if they go up high enough in weight, there are going to be guys whose size and strength can overcome their superior skill. But evidently that was not the case with Errol Spence against Terence Crawford. In fact, after the first couple rounds, maybe first 3 rounds where Spence was aggressive, you could argue that Crawford looked the stronger of the two. And again, forget about being weight drained in car crashes and all that stuff. Look at Spence against Ugas. Ugas is very strong himself. Spence bullied him. So Spence is still tremendously strong at 147. But Bud is also tremendously strong. We know he's got a wrestling background. So now is not the time to be coming up with all your excuses because your guy lost or the fight didn't go the way you wanted it to go or the way you predicted it to go. Now is the time to just give credit to the guy who won, Terence Crawford. That's what time it is. Enough with all the foolishness. Just give Bud Crawford his flowers and be done with it. Anyway, I'll leave it there.